All right. I hope you all had a very good lunch. And I have the unenviable task of keeping you awake this afternoon. So bear with me. Let's work together and make sure that our session, goes smoothly like they have started. The energy levels are quite great, and I see that that is still persisting. And also to acknowledge our online participants. You're welcome, even though we can't see you. We are with you. Please don't forget to share your insights, questions in the chat box. I was just chatting earlier on to the technical team. When the session started, there were over 100 participants online. So this is a really well-attended forum, and kudos to both people in the room and online for this, for your time and your commitment to this. So this fourth session of this forum is going to look at regional economic diversification. Like I said earlier on, we started really looking at what does the just transition look like? How do we coal transition promote energy systems transitions, transformations. Then we went down to look at what actually happens at the ground in terms of, how you manage post-mining rehabilitation and making sure that those systems work effectively for both biodiversity and economic diversification activities and so on. But you can't really talk about the transition without looking at the dynamics of what happens in terms of the regional dynamics and how, we plug into the region, because obviously countries don't, live in isolation. We are part of a global system as far as the world is concerned, even emissions and so on. So looking at diversification of the economics, integrating, regional dynamics is going to be really important. And for this session, we have a really an esteemed panel of experts in this field who are going to showcase specific approaches for diversification challenges and experiences related to, economic transformation from a regional perspective. But just like the running theme for this conference, they're going to highlight any good practices and examples of really excellent approaches to how one can promote economic diversification. And we have, like I said, esteemed speakers from South Africa, Colombia, and Chile. So this session is going to be opened by Ian Steuart. Ian is a project lead for Just SA with tips. Ian brings in a significant experience in terms of international trade negotiations over 15 years. So Ian, I'm hoping that you'll share with us some of your insights in your WTO negotiations and how the Southern Africa region could plug itself into the region in terms of the transition. Over to you, Ian. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. So I'm not sure about me being an expert, but I've been asked to talk about South Africa's experience of economic diversification at the regional level. So I think economic diversification has been a rather persistent and intractable challenge in South Africa over the years. I wouldn't say that as a country we have made great progress in diversifying the South African economy since the early 1990s, and nor would I say that we have made much progress in diversifying the economies of particular regions in South Africa. And I think this has to do with a number of things. I think it has to do with the anemic levels of economic growth that South Africa has experienced over many years. I think it has to do with a very stubborn path dependency, which is shaped by what some economists call South Africa's minerals energy complex. And I think it has to do also with what could be described as an over-reliance on certain approaches to economic diversification that are, I would argue, not particularly appropriate in the context of the just energy transition. So how diversified are South Africa's regional economies? And when I talk about regional economies, I'm talking mainly about our provinces. So the short answer is not much. A recent study looked at how diversified the Gauteng economy was on an annual basis by constructing a TRES index across 50 subsectors in the province from 1993 to 2021. So for those of you who don't know, a TRES index is essentially a measure of economic diversification. If your TRES index value is 0, that represents a fully diversified economy, while the closer the index is to 100, the more concentrated or vulnerable the region's economy is to exogenous variables. So an index above 50 indicates an economy is more concentrated than diversified, while an index below 50 indicates the opposite. So for Gauteng and across these 50 subsectors between 1993 and 2021, the study estimated a mean value of 68.77, a minimum value of 66.5, and a maximum value of 72.8. So higher TRES values were estimated during the financial crisis and the subsequent recession in 2008 and 2009, and also during the COVID-19 period. So I think what this analysis shows, and just bear in mind that it is for Gauteng, is that even with a mean value of nearly 70, even Gauteng, which is where we are now, and it's South Africa's most diversified economy, it is, according to the TRES index, a relatively undiversified economy. And so for all other provinces, I would say that the mean value would almost certainly be higher. In other words, more concentrated than Gauteng. So decarbonization and the energy transition away from fossil fuels has provided, I think, renewed impetus for economic diversification at the regional level in South Africa. Provinces that are heavily dependent on fossil fuels will need to diversify their economies to provide sufficient opportunities for those workers who stand to lose their jobs as coal and other fossil fuels are phased out. This has enormous implications for places like Mpumalanga, as well as provinces that rely on petroleum-based value chains. However, and I want to be slightly provocative here, when we look at regional approaches to economic diversification, there has been, I would argue, an historical over-reliance on special economic zones in South Africa. And this has been accompanied, I think, by a limited understanding of what it takes to make a special economic zone successful, especially in the context of economic diversification and the just transition in regions that are heavily dependent on fossil fuels. So with that in mind, I'd like to give you a very high-level summary of economic diversification efforts in 3 regions in South Africa, and we'll start with Gauteng. Now, Gauteng has produced a strategy document called Growing Gauteng Together 2030. It's a socio-economic development plan instead of an economic diversification strategy per se, but the relevant section of the document does speak to some aspects of economic diversification. Specifically, the plan mentions the diversification of exports to traditional and new markets to support growth and employment creation in Gauteng. The strategy focuses on growing 10 priority sectors, as well as channeling investment into what it calls new growth path sectors, such as the green economy, the knowledge economy, and creative industries. The document also emphasizes special economic zones to grow agro-processing, creative and cultural, and high-tech sectors. So if we look at the province of KwaZulu-Natal, which is on the eastern side of the country, KwaZulu-Natal has developed the 2035 Provincial Growth and Development Strategy. And like the Gauteng strategy, it's not an economic diversification strategy per se, but also a socio-economic development plan. The term diversification is used only once in the strategy document with respect to the diversification of agricultural products and markets, specifically niche markets and agro-processing, and the revitalization of the agro-processing value chain through the beneficiation of agricultural products. Special economic zones receive some attention in the plan, specifically the expansion of SEZs and regional industrial hubs in the province, as well as the strengthening of linkages between the spatial integration of opportunities related to these developments. And if we look at the Western Cape has developed what it calls the Growth for Jobs Strategy 2035. And again, economic diversification in this strategy document is not the primary focus, but diversification is mentioned frequently in the document, especially in the context of diversifying the Western Cape's exports and building resilience. So the strategy identifies short-term opportunities for diversification in the food processing, agriculture, basic iron and steel, wine, of course, and the manufacturing of jewelry and related goods. The strategy also aims to establish the province as the tech startup and venture capital and innovation and design capital of Africa. SEZs in the document are mentioned, but they're mentioned in the context of re-examining the current business model to allow for greater private participation in SEZs, and certainly not, I would say, as the primary approach for diversifying the Western Cape economy. So, in a way, by taking you through these documents, I've set up special economic zones as a bit of a straw man, and there is lots in these provincial strategies beyond SEZs as an approach to economic diversification. But special economic zones are not particularly suited to uplifting poor regions, especially in the absence of a clear strategy of how local firms would be linked to the supply chains of global firms, how they will integrate innovation and research and development into industrial value chains, and how SEZs offer investors something significantly different from what is available in the rest of the economy. In the context of the just transition, provincial governments or regional governments presiding over undiversified, fossil fuel dependent regional economies will need to look beyond SEZs as a diversification strategy. First and foremost, a successful economic diversification strategy at the regional level requires an in-depth understanding of the region's resources, assets, and liabilities, how those assets can be mobilized to match with value chains that face rising demand nationally and globally, and how those resources can be channeled into those value chains to create growth and employment. Unfortunately, I would argue this kind of approach has not been widely adopted at the regional level in South Africa yet. Okay, so turning to economic diversification and Just SA, which is a project that I'm working on. So I'm the project lead of the TIPS component of Just SA. We are aiming to do quite a few things on economic diversification on Just SA. So we have a provincial research program, we have a national research program, and we have a provincial research program. And the provincial research program is entirely devoted to economic diversification. And the first study that we're doing on the provincial research program is looking at unpacking practical pathways for diversifying the economy of the Mpumalanga coal fields. We are also commissioning a short tourism study in Mpumalanga, and here we are aiming to develop recommendations and proposals for tangible projects and policy interventions at the interface of tourism and the just transition, focusing on opportunities in Mpumalanga and the Mpumalanga coal belt specifically. And then on behalf of the Presidential Climate Commission, we are also looking to develop an economic diversification strategy for the Komati region. So that's the region around the Komati power station, which I understand quite a few of you will be visiting tomorrow, right? Thursday, right. So we're going to be developing an economic diversification strategy for the Komati region, and we're going to be looking at identifying opportunities that lie outside the fence. So outside of the power station has been decommissioned, but it is being repurposed. But we're going to be looking at what are the economic opportunities that we can bring to the area around the Komati power station. And I think that is that's the end of my presentation. So thanks very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian, for an elaborate breakdown of the challenges we face in creating economic diversification. Because obviously, according to what you've just said, the regions are quite different. The challenges are really, really different depending on the region on the ground. And for those who don't know, a few years ago, when the iron prices dropped in the Northern Cape, one of the major iron mining companies had laid off 10,000 workers. We talk of stranded assets, but we talk less about stranded communities. And this is because many of these communities are really dependent on one single value chain. So the importance of building local economic resilience is really, really key. And for me, this is really exciting because we're now really moving at a phase of how does implementation happen on the ground. But having said that, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome our second speaker, María José González, who is from the Ministry of Energy, Chile, from Ministry of Energy in Chile. She has a degree in communication sciences and graduated from the Universidad Católica del Norte. Since 2011, she has been part of the Cerami de Energía de la Región de la, I don't know Spanish, but having said that, she's going to make her presentation in Spanish. So if you would like to listen to it in English, it's on channel 3. Yes, that's where you're going to get her presentation. Thank you, Maria. Welcome.
Hola, muy buenas tardes a todas las personas presentes. Voy a hablar en español, así que les pido disculpas, yo no hablo inglés. Y como decía recién, yo vengo de la región de Antofagasta, yo soy de Chile, vengo de la región de la capital energética del país. Y primero que todo, antes de comenzar, quiero agradecer a GIZ por la invitación que nos realizaran para poder presentar la experiencia de Tocopilla y al gobierno de Sudáfrica por recibirnos hoy día acá en este bello país. Acá. Voy a comentar, para partir mi presentación, yo voy a exponer sobre la transición energética justa en Tocopilla y el plan de acción que está desarrollando el Ministerio de Energía. Para comenzar, voy a dar un poco de contexto de lo que es voy a contextualizar sobre la situación energética de la región de Antofagasta. La región de Antofagasta está ubicada en el norte de Chile, es una región que basa su economía en la industria del cobre, en la minería del cobre, y para esto requiere una gran cantidad, tiene una demanda intensiva de energía. Por lo tanto, ha desarrollado una infraestructura energética significativa, que en las últimas décadas ha tenido un crecimiento significativo, lo que lo ha llevado a consolidarse, como les mencionaba antes, en la capital energética del país. Lo interesante de este desarrollo es el cambio que ha tenido en la matriz. Como pueden ver ustedes, en el año 2012, la región de Antofagasta tenía una capacidad instalada de 3.966 megawatts, que eran solamente energía fósil, y tenía 0% de energía renovable. En el año 2024, esta capacidad instalada cambia y pasamos a tener 8.630 megawatts instalados en total, de los cuales 4.875 corresponden a energías renovables, de fuentes como eólica, solar, geotérmica, y tenemos algunas tecnologías que son inéditas en Sudamérica, como la concentración solar de potencia. Es decir, que la capacidad instalada de la región está conformada en un 56,5% de energías renovables variables. Este cambio nos posiciona como un actor clave en la transición energética, porque nos permite habilitar la descarbonización. Como país tenemos el mandato legal de ser carbono neutrales al año 2050 y descarbonizarnos antes del 2040. Y en este contexto, Tocopilla, una comuna de la región de Antofagasta, que se desarrolló al alero de las centrales termoeléctricas, comenzó en 2019 el proceso de cierre de centrales a carbón. Y desde entonces ha sacado o ha retirado 721 megawatts que estaban distribuidos en 8 unidades que pertenecían a las empresas Engie y AES Andes o AES Gener, que se conocía antes. Estos megawatts fueron reemplazados por 1.000 megawatts de energías renovables, provenientes, como les mencionaba antes, de energía solar, fotovoltaica y eólica. Y como parte del proceso de cierre de centrales, las empresas que cerraron sus unidades ofrecieron a los trabajadores planes de retiro o reconversión o reubicación en otros nuevos proyectos. En respuesta al desafío del cierre de las centrales a carbón, el Ministerio de Energía en 2021 presentó la estrategia de transición energética, lo que considera el cierre de las centrales, que el cierre de las centrales no debe enfocarse solo en los aspectos técnicos y económicos, sino que también debe considerar 4 aspectos claves, que son que tienen que estar enfocados en las personas, el desarrollo económico de productividad, el desarrollo ambiental con enfoque territorial y gobernanza participativa y articulación público-privada. Y bajo esta iniciativa de la transición energética, la estrategia de transición energética, a contar del 2022 se comenzó a desarrollar el Plan de Transición Socioecológica Justa de Tocopilla. Y acá me gustaría destacar el proceso que llevamos adelante como Ceremi de Energía, es decir, el representante del ministerio en la región de Antofagasta. Nosotros lideramos este proceso y co-creamos el Plan de Acción de Transición Socioecológica Justa. Este es el primero en el país, es el único que se ha desarrollado a nivel nacional y es el resultado de un trabajo participativo y multisectorial en el que participaron representantes de la sociedad civil, el sector público, la academia, el gobierno regional, las empresas, los sindicatos y UNICEF. También consideró el apoyo de UNICEF porque necesitábamos conocer la visión que tenían los jóvenes y las niñas y los niños sobre el futuro que iba a tener Tocopilla tras el cierre de las centrales a carbón. Y como resultado de esto se elaboró una propuesta de plan de acción compuesto por 4 ejes temáticos que está considerado el desarrollo social, medio ambiente, desarrollo local y productivo y energía. Este plan incluye 17 medidas y más de 100 acciones que serán implementadas por las empresas, los servicios públicos, la municipalidad, organizaciones sociales, y también se estableció un modelo de gobernanza que garantiza la ejecución y el seguimiento del plan basado en principios como la transparencia, la inclusión, la paridad y el respeto a la diversidad. El Ministerio de Medio Ambiente, a través de la Oficina de Transición Socioecológica Justa, es el responsable de coordinar este proceso a nivel local, regional y nacional y de velar que las medidas se ejecuten en tiempo y forma. Y entre las acciones del Plan de Acción de Transición Socioecológica Justa, quiero destacar el programa de Casa Solar Social, que fue impulsado por la Seremi de Energía también, financiado por el gobierno regional con fondos del FNDR, y que busca instalar más de 1.000 paneles solares o instalar paneles solares en 1.000 viviendas de la comuna de Tocopilla. Esta iniciativa permite que las familias puedan generar y consumir su propia energía bajo el modelo de generación distribuida. Y algo interesante de este programa es que fomenta el desarrollo local, pues promueve la contratación de proveedores locales y mano de obra local para temas como la inspección técnica de obras. El cierre de las centrales a carbón marca una transición de una industria que generaba impactos a una industria del futuro que aportará valor a los territorios, creará oportunidades para las personas. Para que esta transición sea exitosa, es esencial contar con capital humano capacitado. Perdón, este es el plan de acción de transición socioecológica justa. Estas son las prioridades que tiene, y tiene puntos priorizados, me salté esta parte, perdón, puntos priorizados en energía, como la electromovilidad, la formación de capital humano, la competitividad y la formación de capital humano calificado, perdón. El capital humano, que les mencionaba, es la base para la transición energética. Sin capital humano no podemos, es el sustento de esta transición. Por lo tanto, como política energética, nosotros tenemos como meta capacitar a 18.000 personas y certificar a 9.000 al año 2030, asegurando que de estas capacitaciones al menos el 30% sean mujeres, un 10% de estas personas provengan de pueblos originarios y otros 10% de comunas en transición, como Tocopilla y Mejillones. Y en este marco, el Ministerio de Energía, en este marco hemos llevado programas de capacitación que están enfocados a formar personas como instaladores eléctricos clase D. También hemos formado personas en operación y mantención de sistemas fotovoltaicos, y además impulsamos capacitaciones exclusivas para mujeres como instaladoras eléctricas clase D. En el país solo existían 44 mujeres, a nivel nacional, 44 mujeres como instaladoras eléctricas clase D, debido a que este es un sector altamente masculinizado. La transición energética afecta de manera distinta, como hemos escuchado a lo largo de este foro, a hombres y mujeres, y debido a desigualdades estructurales presentes en el acceso a oportunidades. Y si bien la transición energética genera oportunidades, para las mujeres en muchos casos enfrentan barreras que son pronunciadas para acceder a estos beneficios. De acuerdo a un diagnóstico que realizó el Ministerio de Energía en 2018, revela que la participación femenina en la industria es de solo un 23%, y que nosotras las mujeres ganamos un 24% menos que los hombres. Cuando analizamos dónde trabaja la mujer dentro de la industria, podemos ver que las mujeres solo están presentes en la operación en un 9%, en los cargos directivos participan en un 10%, y en la administración están presentes en un 57%. Entonces, por eso estamos desarrollando programas para cerrar estas brechas, como la formación exclusiva, como les mencionaba antes, de mujeres en temas como instaladoras eléctricas, porque creemos que esto le entrega oportunidades profesionales, les entrega independencia y les entrega nuevos empleos sostenibles a las mujeres. El proceso de transición justa de Tocopilla es un caso de éxito que ha sido observado de cerca por muchos países. Uno de ellos es Estados Unidos, quien, a través de un convenio que tiene con el Ministerio de Energía, visitaron Tocopilla para conocer in situ este proceso y firmaron un acuerdo para poder desarrollar distintas iniciativas como asistencia técnica a cargo del Departamento de Energía de Estados Unidos, un programa de ciudades hermanas que se firmó en julio de este año, y un proyecto piloto para reutilización de paneles solares. Esto da cuenta de que el proceso que se llevó a cabo en Tocopilla ha sido exitoso, de que permite generar oportunidades, y gracias a esto, Lawrence ahora es ciudad hermana de Tocopilla. Ninguna ciudad en Chile tiene un hermanamiento con otras ciudades de otro país. Esto es un caso inédito, es un caso que se consiguió gracias al proceso de transición socioecológica justa, y que va a permitir que jóvenes, por ejemplo, de Tocopilla puedan viajar a Estados Unidos a hacer pasantías, a hacer máster, y generar también un fortalecimiento del capital humano. Este es el día que se firmó el hermanamiento entre la comuna de Tocopilla con Lawrence. Fue algo inédito, como les comentaba, es algo histórico, y que va a permitir un desarrollo de muchas oportunidades para las personas de Tocopilla. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Maria. No, thank you so much, for that presentation. The first thing that struck my mind, and I just wrote it there in bold, it can be done. For me, this is really an excellent demonstration that it can be done. And the second thing I've noticed in this meeting is that, different countries have their own different journeys. Others are truly on a phase-out phase, and there are others that are on phase-down phase. So like different countries taking different journeys, but together we can learn and transition to a much more inclusive economy. Having said that, I would like to take this opportunity now to welcome our next speaker again from Chile, Tomás Andres Jil Breytmann. Oh, Thomas, yeah. Who is going to talk to us today about Transmission Lineworkers Initiative.
For the presentation. Thank you for this space, for presenting you an initiative that we are pushing in Chile, that we see have a very concrete approach that could actually have a large impact in most of the people that is being left behind in this energy transition. So without further ado, just a little bit of a context. Today, you have heard a lot about Chile, about the regions, and about the enormous potential of renewable energies. But I also have to tell you some of the challenges that we are facing. First of all, as you can see in the graph at the left, these are the curtailments of renewable energies that we're experiencing in the country. As you can see, this is a trend that is going up. Has been increasing, and I have graphed there until 2023. But 2024 wasn't different. Curtailment has been a really big challenge, considering all the renewable energies that we are implementing in the country, especially in the north. And one of the enabling infrastructures that would actually solve this issue is the transmission lines that could further strengthen the grid that we have between the north and the south of the country. The issue of constructing a lot of transmission lines is that we also need human capital for doing so. And since 2021, there have been analysis in Chile about the certain gaps in the energy sector. And one of the identified gaps was actually the one of the line workers. So as you can see, it makes sense to have more line workers to solve this type of issues. Just for highlighting one of the big projects that we have right now in the country in terms of transmission, this is a high voltage transmission line on direct current between Quimal and Lo Aguirre. This is a 1,500 kilometers length transmission line, which involves an investment of $1.5 billion and should start in early 2026. Just for your information, this will actually need more or less 2,000 line workers for constructing the line during the next 4 years. And actually in Chile, we don't have that. We don't have line workers. And most of the transmission lines are actually built with people from Bolivia, Colombia, and India in this case, because one of the subcontractors of this transmission line is planning to subcontract persons from India. From one side, we see that this is not actually sustainable. We're just importing people, but not generating and experiencing the country for actually developing our transmission grid. And even if we look to the other projects, just for your information, we have more or less 5 projects in qualification process, and 3 are already approved. If we only consider that 1/3 of them are going to be built, we are going to need another 2,000 line workers for building all these transmission lines. If we consider the forecast of the needs for line workers in the whole region of Latin America, in the south part of South America, just in Chile, we are going to run short of 800 line workers, and probably we will be delayed if we don't fix that. So at the beginning, we say, hey, this is a big opportunity. Maybe we can try to help our energy transition in this regard and make it a little bit more just. But how can we do it? We started looking for experience. Nationally, there is no line workers training in the country. This is an empirical job. Most of the people that actually work on this have learned it through working with people building these towers. And actually, there wasn't any qualification nor a certification required in the country for doing this type of jobs, which, has to say, is really risky, and it has a lot of potentials for injuries. So we started looking abroad, And actually, we found some really good experience internationally in one of the partner countries in this platform. It was in Colombia. In Colombia, 7 years ago, the transmission sector organized to create a school for supplying the human capital that will be needed for the electric transmission. We realized that, and we said, hey, we maybe need something like this. And we realized that this Corporación Tener Futuro, which is operating this training center, has also started working with only women for some cohorts. So it makes more sense. We can actually, besides solving the issues with the lack of line workers, we can put a gender approach in this initiative. So we kind of try to create a kind of a framework of what will be the stakeholders that will play into this initiative. And it has to say, we have to say that we have been really pushing this, but it's not completely up to us to develop this initiative. We are hoping that the private sector is the owner of this, and not just one company. It should be a center with different companies involved that should be implementing this type of initiatives. But we are trying to push them through basically transferring the knowledge that has one of the countries, that is Colombia, to them, and also trying to coordinate the public and private stakeholders into this map. So by now, we have tried to support all of this initiative by hiring as consultants to Tener Futuro, which is the operator that is working in Colombia with this type of training center. And they are supporting creating the training curriculum, as well as the complementary material. They are helping us to develop a plan for how the training facility should look like. And also they are going to train the trainers that we will have in the initiative in Chile. And we hope that with this step that we are taking, kind of being the first to move in this initiative, most companies in the private sector will join us. By now, we have been working with the Transmission Business Association. They are really into it, but we have to say that there are 17 transmission companies in Chile, so it's not an easy task to put them all in the same wagon, nor to define the actual baseline that you will need for training the line workers for each company. But by now, I have to tell you that we have been advancing really nicely. Just for you to know, at the beginning, we started not knowing anything. We have been learning along the run of this initiative. We started having meetings with the Ministry of Energy and Conexión, which actually will build this high voltage transmission line that I mentioned to you, the big project in Chile. And due to these meetings with the Ministry of Energy, I started the process of Chile Valora, which is the organization in Chile that certifies certain type of technical jobs. So we were glad to know that because of this meeting, they started an update of the profile of the line workers, which will actually guide us in the type of skills that they will need, along having a framework or certifications that they should have at the end of a training. So this run in parallel with what we have done also. We have visited the training center in Colombia with the Ministry of Energy and some training centers in Chile. And by July, the middle of this year, we concreted the consultancy with Tener Futuro. And by now, we are formulating what will be the training curriculum for the line workers. And what we're spending for us is try to move more transmission companies into this wagon and to mention them that it's easier to collaborate in this regard than just to compete. They can compete in prices, but it's not really economically feasible to start trying to poach line workers from one company to the other. So we are trying to also support the coordination between the public and the private sector, trying to make the process of Chile Valora, talk with the process that we are leading, and we hope that by the beginning of 2025, we'll start training our first line workers. We really hope so. It's really optimistic, but I'm sure that we are going to find a way to do it. And by the end of 2026, they should be more or less ready to start working in one transmission line, and hopefully they will start working in Queimalo Aguirre. Having said that, thank you for this time. That's all.
Thank you, Thomas. To be honest with you, I'd never known that line workers is an issue, you know? Because in South Africa, for example, we've run out of transmission lines for our major solar producing region in the country. And if you consider that solar construction basically typically during the construction phase employs about 2,000 people, just imagine if those 2,000 people who eventually are going to lose their jobs could actually transition into line workers in the South African economy. So there you go. I don't know who, ESCOM. Anyway, so all right, so our last speaker, and really thank you for bearing with me. Our last speaker today is Alejandro Echavarría from Colombian Natural Resources. He's going to talk to us about policies for economic diversification in Colombia, a bottom-up initiative. I apologize for not reading out the long bios. I know anyone who takes up a stage here has a very, very, very long bio, so welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the GIZ team for the invitation. Very excited to be here. Excited to tell you a story. I'm gonna kind of freshen up the format a little. This is a story coming from Colombia. This is happening as we speak. We are working with what we got at the moment. This is a private initiative. My name is Alejandro Echavarría. I am the sustainability manager for the CNR Group. We are a coal mining company. We are also in the rail business, and we've developed a business model around JET, the just energy transition, as they say here. And it's in the key of JET, and it's a vision for Colombia's Cesar coal region that we want to share with you, and that we think we can replicate, that can be replicated and be taken as a reference case for other coal producing regions. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about Colombia, about our mining sector, kind of give you some context of what Colombia is. We are a member of the OECD, of the Organization of Economic Cooperation. We are the fourth largest economy in Latin America, behind Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina. It's a large economy. Our top exports are crude, refined petroleum, coal, gold, coffee, met coke, flowers, and bananas. Very extractive industries, primary industries as well. And our top imports are also refined products, grains, incredibly so. We import a lot of the grains that we eat, such as wheat, soy, and corn, machinery, telecoms, and pharmaceuticals. We have a very clean energy matrix, as my colleague, I think Maria Elena mentioned this morning. More than 70% of our energy is produced from hydro sources, and less than 10 is really reliant on coal. We have coal. We are big producers of coal, as I'll mention in a few slides, but really we use it more as a backup. We are not coal dependent on our energy matrix. And I'm going to talk to you throughout this presentation about economics, people, and environment. I think as many of the presentations that preceded, we have to reflect upon JET as being a process that must be people-centered, and it has to have certain conditions to, really work. So in terms of economy, quick facts on Colombia. In terms of people, we're very colorful people, multi-ethnic. We have more than 50 million people, third in Latin America behind Brazil and Mexico, big country. Multi-ethnic, over 87 different ethnic groups. Multilingual, over 69 indigenous language. Multicultural, we are a mix of Spanish, European, indigenous, Afro cultures. And we see that in our music, for instance. And music is a big deal for us, as you may know. In terms of our environment, I was actually kind of sad to learn that we're number 3. We were beat by Indonesia. So my Indonesian colleagues, congratulations. I always thought we were number 2, but yesterday I checked my facts and we're number 3. In any case, very biodiverse country. We have the most species of birds in the world, amphibians, butterflies, orchids, among other. We're also a very water-rich country, which is why, you know, we're heavily dependent on hydro. 6th most water-rich country in the world, behind a country as big as China and above the European Union. We host a variety of ecosystems due to our different topography, geography, high mountains, and also because of our energy matrix, we produce less than 0.4% of global CO2 emissions. I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's a very small percent of CO2 emissions worldwide. Quick facts on our mining industry. So economics, our mining industry represents about 2.4% of our GDP. It produces about $5 billion annually in taxes and royalties. Those are resources which the government depends on to provide essential services in the country. We are the top producer of thermal and met coal in Latin America. And about $5 billion annually is, let's say, channeled domestically for procurement of goods and services. Very important for our economy, very important for our economy. Most of it's exported, but it has a huge impact. In terms of people, our mining industry, including precious metals and other mining products, including gold, employs over 1 million people between direct and indirect jobs. Socially, about $100 million are invested in social impact programs in Colombia from the mining industry. This is both obligatory and voluntary social investment. And in terms of environment, the mining industry invests annually $250 million in environmental investments, excuse me. And finally, in terms of regulation, we have a very ambiguous energy transition roadmap. We have not been able to really pin it down and you know, let's say, establish a road path forward as a producing country. We are a coal producing country. We do not consume it. And we also have very weak mine closure regulation. So in this conversation, you see around JET, I think a lot of countries are looking and talking in one direction. We have the European countries and let's say the developed countries very worried about reducing emissions, phasing out coal generation. And then there's this guy over here. Oh, sorry, what did I do? Which is looking the other way. That can be Colombia or any other producing country, saying, you know, what about us? You know, this is an activity that really isn't, we're not going to save the planet. If we stop producing coal, the day after tomorrow, maybe Indonesia, maybe China, maybe Russia will produce the same amount of coal within a matter of seconds. So what happens to us? Where is Colombia and where are countries like Colombia that depend heavily on the mining industry for social, environmental investments and for really the functioning of the state? Where do we stand? So, as I said, I work at CNR. CNR quickly, economics, people, environment. CNR in 2021 was a distressed asset. It was an abandoned coal mine, which no one really was interested in, and a group of Colombian private equity purchased it because we had an idea around taking those assets and repurposing them, taking the land, repurposing it, and very strategically, CNR owns something that in Colombia doesn't exist, which are rail and port assets. So we saw an opportunity there to take those assets, and those are a fundamental part of our business model. In terms of people, so we currently employ about 2,000 jobs, direct and indirect, associated to our operation. We are situated very close to a neighboring township called La Loma, which has about 25,000 people. They're our neighbors, and we have in La Loma a very interesting campus which we use to work with the communities. Environment, we have over 3.5 thousand hectares of conservation and rehabilitated lands, and our properties, let's say, are close to other mining companies, and there we've been able to consolidate these ecological corridors because around these mining operations, there's a lot of natural conservation. So the new business model is based on multi-actor dialogue and changing the land use and repurposing the mining and logistics assets to catalyze new economies of scale. How do we catalyze new economies in coal-producing regions? Our proposal as a private initiative, we do not depend on government funding or international cooperation. We're winging it as we go. We're mining and we're investing in the country and we're investing in repurposing these assets because in 2040, we would like to see La Loma like this, with some coal pits, maybe filled with water, perhaps, our rail lines repurposed for multi-purpose transport, and in general, just a large-scale restoration of the environment. So our vision, which we want to present to you today, is land use and asset repurposing. And we have the following actions: ecological restoration, nature-based solutions, repurposing of the mining and logistics assets, and research and development. I want to highlight very quickly here research and development because I'm not going to talk about it further ahead, but we have strategic alliances with universities, and among other things, we are also looking at the presence of rare earth minerals within the mine complex, and more specifically within the sterile earth, let's say the earth that's left over from the mine. There appears to be presence of rare earth minerals, and we're studying that actively also in terms of repurposing mining and logistics. How do we do this? We create territorial alliances for just energy transition. And here, this is key. I cannot emphasize this as much. Here I am with my good friend, the mayor of La Loma, of El Paso. The strategy is basically involving academia, civil society, and local government. And it sounds a little obvious, and I know a lot of us have talked about this, but I cannot stress this enough because what we're doing here is we are proposing and gathering ideas from the community. We're proposing and validating ideas with the academia, and we're working with local government in terms to get these ideas off the ground. Dialogue, community, and participation. So it's not only the territorial alliances, but also the community participation. And in this, Colombia is, my time's up, I'll be 2 more minutes. Colombia is a leader in terms of participating communities in project permitting processes. We are currently regulating UN's Escazú agreement, which is on environmental justice and access to information. We are currently applying it. And at CNR, what we've done since we started this operation is create those platforms and those channels to talk to the community, to have that dialogue. And 2 examples of those is one project we had, which is called El Plan El Paso. We had monthly committees with doors open for the whole community, talking about problems, talking about solutions, talking about projects, receiving ideas from the communities. That helped us a lot. And another project which we also did with another ally was over 20 days, we reunited over 400 people of the community, and they established on their own road path, their own roadmap for the territory. And they're saying, we want to continue mining. We want a better future. We need the legacy of the mining industry to be net positive. How do we do that? So we start working on that. And out of those discussions, one of the first things we did was invest in the local aqueduct because the people said, what just energy transition are you talking about if there's no drinking water? There's no transition if there's no water. So we started working on the water plant. This plant is currently operative. This was an alliance with the local mayor, and this has benefited over 20,000 people at La Loma. Our second project is the transition of our coal trains to multi-purpose trains. This is currently underway. This is probably the biggest infrastructure project in Colombia right now. And this is a legacy of the mining industry, taking the local rail trains and transitioning a service that was used to be for a private actor to the public sector. We're currently leading Colombia's reactivation of rail here are the mines, and we are repurposing our port, which here you can see some designs of this. This is a $700 million project, infrastructure project in Ciénaga. The mine sector is here, but the rail continues over 500 kilometers down to La Dorada, which is very close to our capital city. So this is going to revolutionize transport in Colombia. This will, transport is, again, responsible for most of our emissions in Colombia. So this is going to be a huge factor in decarbonizing transport sector in Colombia. And again, this is coming from the mining industry. This is coming from a diversification of the mining industry. And lastly, through nature-based solutions, these are key in changing land use. Here we're talking about agroforestry projects. We're talking about conservation, ecological restoration projects. Regarding also and around the environmental remediation of the mining. This photo you see here is one of our landfills, actually. It's over 15 years has been built. It's completely reforested. And these are also ecological corridors for wildlife and watersheds. So again, JET conversation, I think a lot of people are looking that way. We're kind of looking this way. It's a complicated conversation. I'm glad we're here. For sure, JET has many meanings for many people. I think JET takes time and money. There's really no time to waste. And also, mining is a progressive activity. Mining cannot be thought of as a beginning and end. Mining, well, it is a beginning and end, but in that beginning and end, there are multiple projects. There's the mining project, then there's the closure project, then there's the post-closure project, and each of those moments should be seen as projects in of themselves and have to be financed and have to be sustainable as well. So I'll leave it there. We believe, today's mining should finance the just energy transition of tomorrow while we have those projects, while social environmental obligations are attended, while we think about different ways of closing mines and setting up businesses. This should be a business approach. Thank you very much. And this is our vision from Colombia for you.
Thank you, Alejandro, for giving the private sector perspective in this and how the transition can be done in real in terms of what's happening on the ground. We don't have much time. I would like to take one question online, and let's see what the room says. But we are up for lunch, basically. Should we start with online? No, there's no online question. So let's take I want to give priorities to people who have not spoken yet. And then we'll come over there. And then we'll come here. It's okay. There's a microphone there. Thank you.
Yeah,
if you can introduce yourself and who your question is directed to. Thank you.
Okay, right. My name is Ukwezi Mabasa. And I have two questions. The first question is it's rather a comment for Ian. I think that one of the key components of an industrial diversification strategy is industrialization, essentially, and local content. And I think we've failed at developing basically a coherent industrialization strategy in the low carbon economy in South Africa, especially if one looks at the renewable energy independent power producers program. And I think that's something that we should place emphasis on, especially if we want to change the nature of trade that we have with the global north. And I'd like to hear your thinking around that. Then the second question to the colleagues from Chile and Colombia. I think one of the key debates about the just transition is the question of ownership, and whether we can have different forms of ownership in the economy in the just transition, especially in countries of the global south. So do we have examples in the emergence of the new energy sectors of different forms of ownership that aren't reliant on just what we traditionally understand as multinational corporations? And are there even socially owned forms of ownership, such as cooperatives or even worker-controlled companies? Or are we just thinking in one way? Sorry.
Thank you. Can I suggest we take a round of questions and come response once with the final input? There was a microphone there, and then the lady here, and then the gentleman. Sorry, could I just follow him?
Hi, Sushant Khargal. I'm the policy advisor from GIZ Talent, and I have a quick question for Chile, for Thomas. I think it's one question on the new transmission investment. Does the Chilean government has the local content requirement for the company that want to build the new transmission line that require that make sure that this program will create more jobs, and also what is qualification for the worker who want to join this transmission line training program? So it's like we have that's kind of the thing, like to make sure that it's like we can create more jobs at the end of the program. Yeah, thanks.
Over here in the center, the lady, and then the gentleman.
Hi, I'm from Colombia. I'm going to speak in Spanish. So, bueno, muchas gracias a las presentaciones. Yo tenía una pregunta para los compañeros de Chile. Primero para la compañera. Me imagino que con la llegada del gobierno también hubo unos cambios internamente dentro del Ministerio de Energía de Chile. Quisiera saber un poco qué tipo de cambios se tuvieron que hacer en marco de la gobernanza para lograr estos proyectos asociados socioecológicos, como los mencionaste. Y para el compañero de Chile, desde Colombia sí se ha venido trabajando bastante en todo lo que tiene que ser la mano de obra local para proyectos de energías renovables. Sin embargo, siempre cuando uno va a los proyectos que están haciendo en La Guajira, en el norte de La Guajira, siempre se nota que los trabajos de expertos sí son hechos por otros países. Digamos, generalmente nuestra mano de obra en más temas expertos vienen desde México, desde Estados Unidos, y no son en Colombia que están haciendo. Y eso tiene que ver por la baja inversión que se está haciendo en términos de actividades más de experticia y no mano de obra local. Entonces, mi pregunta era un poco si también se ha pensado no solo desde la mano de obra local, sino también desde generar unas soberanías dentro del conocimiento, dentro de las esferas más expertas que quería hacer. Y muchas gracias.
Thank you. Can you give to the next gentleman? And that will be our last question for this session.
Hi, my name is Carlos from the Philippines, Climate Change Commission of the Philippines. The question is directed for Ms. Maria of Chile. The Philippine government is currently in the process of finalizing our national framework on just transition, and it aims to cover transportation, energy, and employment. So I just wanted to know, I'm particularly interested with the experience of Chile, whether it started from a national framework or was it locally led or initiative, and what are the best practices in crafting a national framework, or if it's local, on just transition. At the same time, best practices on engaging your stakeholders. You mentioned earlier about the youth participation, employment, and also we want to hear that or to know that as well. So maybe the Philippines can replicate your best practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those will be our last questions. Can I request the panelists to respond to those questions? We only have 2 minutes. And before tea break, so the rest of the convention can continue over tea break. Just respond in the quickest way possible in 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Shall I kick off?
Go.
All right. So thanks. Yeah. I think economic diversification is a very tricky thing to get right, and I think in South Africa's case, we're trying to diversify the economy. We're trying to diversify regional economies, particularly Mpumalanga, in the context of deindustrialization, in the context of path dependency, and in the context of very low levels of economic growth. So it's a major challenge. And I think what I was trying to convey in my presentation was that in the past, I think provincial governments have tended to rely too heavily on special economic zones as an approach to economic development and diversification. And I think in the context of the just transition, we need to think out of the box. We need to think beyond special economic zones. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have them in the mix, but fundamentally, we need to look at value chains, we need to look at where the demand is coming from, and we need a really thorough understanding of each particular region's assets, liabilities, and resources if we're going to come up with a catalog or a menu of economic diversification options. And I think you're right. I think we really do need to reinvigorate the public renewable energy procurement program.
Thank you, Ian. You can pass the microphone on to whoever wants to respond next.
So I will reply to the question about qualifications. At the beginning, we didn't actually know what were the requirements for being a line worker. And in that regard, we actually asked the people from Colombia who lead this initiative for about 7 years. And actually, the requirement is having 5th grade. That is the actual requirement for starting your job as a line worker. In Chile, probably our requirement will be to have a secondary education finished. But there isn't a hard requirement on having a tertiary education completed. You're going to start from there. That also links to another aspect in which are the people suitable for this type of initiatives. At the beginning, we thought about direct workers, but the aspiration and the qualifications might not be directly linked to this type of reconversion. So we might be thinking more about indirect workers that were related to the coal power generation, but not directly working in the coal power plants.
Thank you.
El Ministerio de Energía lideró el proceso de transición socioecológica justa en Tocopilla y luego lo toma el Ministerio de Medio Ambiente. El Ministerio de Medio Ambiente ahora está encargado de velar para que las acciones que se plantearon en el proceso de transición socioecológica justa de Tocopilla puedan concretarse en tiempo y forma y que los responsables tengan claridad de cómo debe seguir el proceso. No sé si esa era la consulta que me hizo la persona de Colombia, ¿sí?
Thank you. There was one last question around ownership, and I think it's directed to the private, to Colombia, if I'm not mistaken. Was it? The question around ownership, new forms of ownership, cooperatives from Chile, okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So we own the operations and the assets and the properties, but I think there is a conversation to be had around participation and ownership of the projects, because obviously what we're trying to do involves a lot of communities. And we are neighboring to a populous community. So I would say that there is a lot of room in these mine closure diversification projects to work very closely with communities, to associate communities, and to support, as in other presentations this morning, we talked about SMEs, support small and medium enterprises. That's a big part of what we do with our communities, strengthening capacities so that they can be our local providers and local allies in this new economy, because that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to go away from a situation in which the economy and the region and the community is highly dependent on the mining economy to diversify it away. So I would respond in that sense. I think it is key for local communities and local stakeholders to participate in this project. And from the private sector, we are trying to put the conditions in place, such as the train, a working train and working port, so that new economies can sprout and develop.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I would like us to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for an excellent session.